A new topic for the lab exam is PPP over Ethernet. Let's go ahead and join Marvin Greenlee as he demonstrates PPP over E.
We're going to take a look at a quick PPPoE example. So starting off, we have two devices, router 4 and router 6. And currently they're just sitting on the same subnet. Router 4, address 155.20.146.4, and router 6 the same, just with the last octet being the .6. So starting off, we have a basic connectivity between these two. They're both on the same VLAN. Verify we have the existing connectivity there. So able to ping from router 6 to router 4. We're going to go ahead and remove the addresses from the interface themselves and switch over to the PPPoE config. Now, the PPPoE config, having a separate virtual side of things, getting the PPP over top of the Ethernet. So the PPP itself being done with logical interfaces. So starting with router 4. And router 4 is going to be our client. Router 6 is going to be our server. FA00, we're going to go ahead and just remove that address. Now looking at what options we have for PPPoE. We have PPPoE and PPPoE client. So we said router 4 is going to be our client. So let's take a look at our client options. Client option, we have an option for a dialer pool. So a dialer pool option, and a number. Any other options after that? Other miscellaneous items, dial on demand, service items. So at a minimum, PPPoE client, dialer pool, and the dialer pool number. So before we get into referencing a dialer pool, we're going to go ahead and set up a dialer interface. So interface dialer 1. And could use 1, could use 123, could use 46, whatever you'd like. Now for the dialer interface, we need some sort of mechanism to get an address. We could do an IP address negotiate that information. We could also do IP address DHCP. We're going to go ahead and just use DHCP this time around. And set the encapsulation to PPP. And even though our dialer is dialer number 1, we need to have a dialer pool associated with that. So a dialer pool, and we're going to go ahead and just say dialer pool 6. Now on our interface, PPPoE client, and referencing that dial pool of 6. So having the dialer pool referencing the pool on the interface. Now if we just take a quick look at our configuration here, show run interface dialer 1, showing us we have address DHCP specified on that dialer interface, encapsulation of PPP, and the dialer pool of 6, and a show run interface for the FA00. Showing us that we have the PPPoE client reference that dialer pool. Now you do notice that it also inserted the command PPPoE enable, so we did not have to type that one in. It was enabled by default there for us. And on the FA00 interface, we're going to go ahead and just shut this down and bring it back up after we've configured the server side on router 6. So on router 6, now router 4 we said was going to do DHCP for the addressing. So getting its address by DHCP. Router 6, we're going to go ahead and just configure that device as the DHCP server. So we're just going to set up a basic DHCP pool. And give some network addresses here. Subnet and range. Now, on router 6, we also need a virtual interface. We're going to go ahead and configure a virtual template. Let's do virtual template 1. And give it an address. Address of 155.20.146.6. And that does overlap with our fast Ethernet, so we're going to go ahead and just remove the address on our fast Ethernet. Alright, so we've got an address on a virtual template. Next, we want to hand out that information for DHCP. So setting up our peer information. Setting the peer address information. And referencing that DHCP pool we configured. Now you can also just do an address pool and do the peer default IP address of pool. We're just using DHCP here. Now for the newer versions with the PPPoE, uses what's called a BBA group, Broadband Access Group. Older versions used VPDN in some of the configurations. So if you see some of the older examples, they may have some VPDN configured that's not necessary for the newer iOS versions. So we're going to go ahead and just configure that BBA group. And different options we have for BBA group, we have PPPoE. So PPPoE and options here, global or a group name. We're going to go ahead and specify a group name. And within that, just reference that virtual template. And go ahead and exit out of the BBA group configuration. And on the interface itself, PPPoE enable, and referencing that group. Alright, so quick recap of the configuration. On router 6, who is our server, we started off having a DHCP pool set up because we're using DHCP for addressing. A virtual template configured. The addressing information, making sure it doesn't conflict, so we remove the other address off the FA00. Have a BBA group referencing that virtual template, and then applied to the interface itself. And we're going to switch back to router 4. And go ahead and bring up our interface. It may take just a minute to get that DHCP address. We see our line protocol change to up. You get a little bit of time for its negotiation here. We show our virtual access up. Interface bound to the dialer 1 there. Take a quick check back through our config here. Dialer interface, DHCP encapsulation there. To dialer 1, we have the dial pool specified on our interface. And then we have an address that's assigned out, the 155.20.146.3. Take a look at our information here, showing that we do have that subnet directly connected by the dialer 1 interface. show PPPoE sessions. And showing that we do have an existing session there. Take a peek at router 6 as well. And again, having those two items matching up. On router 6, showing that session as locally terminated. And again, having the addresses flipped for the remote and local MACs between the two. So next we want to go ahead and verify that we can ping across the connection. So we're going to go ahead and try pinging that address. In this case, we had the address of .3 handed out. Okay, so we can ping there. Let's see if we try a larger packet. So we pinged with a basic packet, getting response, pinging with a larger packet, not getting through. So let's see if there's a certain size where we start to have problems. We have able to get through at 1400. Looks fine at 1400. Able to get through at 1500. Not quite able to get through at 1500. Let's try a little bit lower than that. What about 1480? And 1480 will be able to get through fine. So in this case, we have certain ping sizes not able to make it through. And taking a look at the interfaces we have, in this case on router 6, looking at the virtual template, and that got cloned into the virtual access, so showing virtual access 2.1. Now here we see something kind of important to be aware of. We have an MTU showing here of 1492. We can check and see if that matches what's on the other side. Show IP interface brief. In this case, we have our dialer 1 interface. In this case, this side having an MTU of 1500. So a definite mismatch in MTU, something that you may not notice. You may be able to pass traffic fine, not seeing the issue. However, trying to pass larger packets would cause problems. Other areas you may have problems, possibly getting things like adjacencies with routing protocols, certain routing protocols, looking at MTU OSPF, for example, having problems if the MTU is different to a peer. So we're going to go ahead and just adjust this. And we're just going to say IP MTU of 1492. And we're going to go ahead and try that ping again. So able to ping through with larger packets now. Again, verifying from both sides. And success. A quick recap of the configuration. On router 4, we have the dialer interface, which is then bound into the fast Ethernet interface. We'll take a look at those two. Show run interface dialer 1 and show run interface FA00. So the dialer 1 interface, IP address, in this case choosing to do it by DHCP, encapsulation PPP, dialer pool number of 6, and that's referenced on the fast Ethernet 00 PPPoE client dial pool number 6. On router 6, the server side of our connection, we have a DHCP pool configured, and showing a DHCP binding shows information there for that .3 handed out to our client. Then we also have the virtual template that we configured. Let's take a look at that configuration. And the BBA group. And then apply to the interface. Now in this case, just looking at a basic configuration, not really getting into some of the other advantages of doing PPP. One of the biggest advantages of a PPP example for a PPPoE can be just getting into basic peer endpoint authentication, which just the regular Ethernet by itself, passing across other devices, doesn't really have that capability. So in this case, being able to add in the authentication. So we're going to go ahead and add in the quick authentication here on router 4 and router 6. And so in router 6, we're going to go ahead and just configure that on the virtual template. And we'll say PPP authentication chap. And then on router 6, we're going to go ahead and have a username configured. Username R4 with a password of Cisco. And we're just doing a unidirectional challenge. So we just have router 6 challenging router 4. Go ahead and put some credentials in on router 4. So on router 4, adding in PPP chat hostname and PPP chat password. And showing that our interface does come back up. And we're going to go and turn on debug PPP authentication. We're going to go and just shut down the interface and bring it back up. Verify we do see the authentication happening. So our interface has changed it down. Go ahead and no shut. Interface should come back up, and we should see the authentication in the debug here. And we're going to go ahead and just shut down our dial interface as well. Verify our logging's on. And our virtual access is changed to down. And again, here we see the challenge information. Challenge came in from router 6. Used our hostname password configured on a local dial interface, and showing that we have response here and success. So inbound success. And the line protocol changed up, gave us a new address. And again, in this case, just adding on that CHAP authentication. So just a quick look at what changed here. So on the dialer interface on router 4, as the client side, adding the credentials, hostname, and password. Who didn't have a hostname specified, will be using his own router hostname. And on router 6, having the username configured globally, as well as the command PPP authentication CHAP on the virtual template. So we have a basic PPPoE example, additional adding on the authentication piece, and verification, debugging, verifying the authentication did take place.